I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, but you know, I welcome you all. I love speaking in this building because its history is very much tied to the Hudson River. And if you look up and see that canoe dangling from the ceiling over your head, the name of that canoe is Toshi. Toshi. And that was Pete Seeger's wife. And Pete always said all the projects that he did with the Hudson River sloop and everything, Toshi was the woman that really made things work. So today, hot off the press, my publicist is working overtime. So there's copies in the back. Copies in the back. You can't make this stuff up. So anyway, sometimes I ask myself, I got the greatest job in the world. I'm working on the Science Barge for Groundwork Hudson Valley, and we talked together, and I said, it's great to be on the river. Ooh, it's great. You know, even today, you know, even in storms, it's wonderful to be out on that Science Barge. So, a little bit about myself. How did I get involved with this river stuff? You know, I've been involved most of my life. But I grew up in upper Manhattan. People say they grew up on the Upper West Side, and I say, where? They tell me Midtown. I grew up on 214th Street and Seaman Avenue on the upper West Side. So I was blessed that I had Spike and I would break the Harlem River and the Hudson, all three together. So when I was fortunate that I met a man by the name of Joseph McCarthy, and he was what they called the rigger for the Columbia rowing shells. And in those days, it wasn't plastic, it was some cigar box wood. These long boats that held 9 men at the time. It must have been, how long were they, Ted?
60 feet.
60 feet long, made of cedar. And of course, they would crack, and Joe McCarthy's job was to repair those boats. And when he retired, he decided to buy a barge. Now, how many people have dreamt about buying a houseboat, living on the river? Joe McCarthy did it the right way. He went down to Edgewater, New Jersey, and there was an 80-foot wood barge, 28 feet wide. It looked like Noah's Ark. So Joe put all his worldly possessions on that, including at least 14 cats. Some of you cat people think you got it. McCarthy had 14 at least, and 7 dogs. So, and he had that on the Harlem River, and we hung out there as kids, and we had all kinds of boats, rowboats, leopard kayaks, you name it. It was a great place to hang out. And then McCarthy got tired of the view on the Harlem River at 215th Street. It was a great place, so he got a tugboat, and he moved in behind the Statue of Liberty. And he always said he had the best view of the skyline in the world. You know, because he woke up in the morning to work at the deck, and there was the Statue of Liberty and the New York skyline. He wasn't a big fan of New Jersey. He always said that even the Statue of Liberty turned its back on New Jersey. But he had a great life. Eventually, of course, he died on the river. But he was a great man, and that's how I got involved. So then I was involved with ferry sloops up the river, the Sojourner Truth. That was the third of the Hudson River sloops. There was the Clearwater, the big one, and then the Woody Guthrie that actually belonged to Pete. Pete would never say that the Clearwater belonged to him. You know, he would get upset because he believed that the Clearwater belonged to everyone. So, but the Woody Guthrie he paid for. His wife Toshi, that's probably listening from that canoe, said, Pete, you're spending the retirement money. And Pete said, you know, let's build a boat. And then he built this, well actually he did pay for the Sojourner Truth, which was the third Hudson River sloop. And that was a ferro cement boat, made of cement, You know, the joke always was, will it float? The cement float. So, but the Sojourner was 1/3 the size of the Clearwater, and it was named after Sojourner Truth from the Hudson River Valley. And I sailed on that for 10 years up in Hastings at the Anaconda site. Anaconda. How many of you folks know the Anaconda Wire Company up in Hastings? The Anaconda site. So it was kind of interesting when we came down to Yonkers, and there was another building at 21 Alexander Street. This is 35. So 21 was literally 20 feet south of this building. So it was 3 steel buildings, like Quonset huts. And I got a call to go to an environmental meeting down in this 21 Alexander Street. I said, geez, that address sounds familiar. 21 Alexander Street, Yonkers. I didn't spend a lot of time in Yonkers in those days. But I came down, and it turned out to be the building where I had been dressed up in a uniform. And blue thing, white hat, kerchief. They had a salute when you went in. It was the old Naval Reserve Center. The old Navy Reserve Center. So now they were making it into a Hudson River Youth Center. And one of the people I met at the door, practically the first day, was this guy, Fred Danback. Fred Danback. This was in Andy Hodak. Where's Andy here? Andy is my date person. What year was that we first met Fred Danback? Don't give me that look. Fred Danback.
We came together around the spring of '83.
Spring of '83. Always good to have somebody good with dates. Spring of '83. So Danback, when I first met him, he was the kind of guy, and he's the hero of this story, the untold story of the environmental movement, Fred Danback. He lived on Hawthorne Avenue down the block, and he was a river guy. Danback loved the Hudson. And for most of us, and a lot of these kayakers and stuff, and people that live in Yonkers, we're river people. We're in a river village. And it brings us joy to paddle on the river. You know, Bob Morrow loves to get out there. I see him many times paddling alone. And it's that connection with the river that makes it work. So Danback in the early 60s, and I mean early 60s, this is like 1962, the river was dismal. It was a sewer. It was depressing. But people still loved it, you know, because there's that magic there. There's something about that river that connects you. So Danback was a member of the Volunteer Life-Saving Corps, which was down at the mouth of the creek. They had boats. They actually went out and rescued people. Frank Kendrick and Kay Kendrick, that some of you know. Danback had married Kendrick's sister. So there was a family connection. And then about that time, the sewage treatment plant at Ludlow is getting bigger. Sewage treatment plant is getting bigger. Why is that? Because we're flushing the toilets. So they had to build a bigger plant. So down at the end of the plant, there was a volunteer life-saving station. And the river was a mess. Fred at the time was working up at Anaconda. And here he was working at Anaconda. Copper, PCBs. And the same thing happened right up the road here. You know, they had pipes going into the river. They had PCBs in the second floor of the washrooms. Because the workers didn't know. And PCBs took oil off their hands, so they would pump the hand washing things, and they used the PCBs to wash their hands. So, you know, Fred was an activist, and he called the Coast Guard. He called the Coast Guard, the United States Coast Guard. Fred Danback. He's pushing a broom. He's like me. make a phone call, do something, don't stand by. So the Coast Guard comes up in their uniforms, and they're walking around with the management of Anaconda, and they see the pipes with the sewage and the oil. And what happens is, you know the Center Restaurant? How many of you guys know the Center Restaurant in Hastings? Old Burton Avenue, Center Restaurant. Fred walks past the window of the Center Restaurant, and there's the management of Anaconda and the Coast Guard having lunch. So Fred opens the door. I could just see the scene in my mind. He opens the door, he throws the door open, he walks down the aisle, slams his fist, and he says to the Coast Guard, "You're not supposed to be having lunch with these guys, you're supposed to be enforcing the law." So the Coast Guard walked around and they decided that they would make Anaconda put wells in to take some of the oil and sludge out of the ground. And the wells were little centrifugal pumps. They went to dump, to dump, to dump. So one of the workers, as a joke, he went around and he labeled these little pump wells, dam back well number 1, dam back well number 2. And of course that drove Anaconda management crazy. So getting back to taking the volunteer life-saving corps down in Ludlow out of action because the sewage treatment plant was getting bigger, Fred went down there and he was cleaning out, and I think it's almost like you guys with the canoe club. You know, it always seems to be able to find something in a locker that doesn't look like it's any good anymore. But Damback is cleaning out this old locker, and he finds a mildew, barely legible. When he looks at it, and he probably put his reading glasses on like I should, but he said, "It's the Clean River Act of 1899. This is 1960. And the Clean River Act says it's U.S. Code 407, deposit of refuge in navigable waters. It should not be lawful to throw, discharge, or deposit, or cause sufferer procured to be thrown, discharged, or deposited, either from the ship, barge, or other floating craft of any kind, or from the shore." From the shore. Holy cow. So Damback, grabs this paper, and I'm sure he went up to the gang here, and Fred was a live wire, he's waving this paper around, hooray, hooray, we have something to enforce the law. So in those days, Congressman Dick Ottinger was our congressman. And he was active in the Hudson River. Dick Ottinger, he later became the dean of Pace Law School. So Fred goes into Ottinger's office, and he's got his piece of paper. And I guess it was the days that you could walk into a congressman's office without an appointment. So he walked in, and he shows Dick Ottinger this piece of paper. And Dick reads it, and he says, "What do you want me to do with this? What do you want me to do?" And I have a feeling Fred was a real thumper. Slammed his hands down and said, "Enforce the law. Enforce the law." And Ottinger, to his credit, he said, "Fred, come with me." He said, "This 1899, March 3rd to be exact, 1899. So they walked across the street to Whitney North Seymour's office. Whitney North Seymour was the Attorney General. And Whitney North looked at it, he said, "Can't be on the books, 1899. Great thing about us is we never take anything off the books." So Whitney North Seymour, he gives this to one of his interns, and they look it up, and guess what? That law was still on the books. Still on the books. So just about the time that Fred was doing this law, there was a group called the Hudson River Fishermen's Association that was starting. It was started by Bob Boyle and a bunch of other guys. Don Perone, that was a professor at Manhattan College. Art Blocher was an airlines pilot. John Margo, that's the publisher of this magazine, was there. And Margo said, when I was there, he said this wild and crazy guy from Yonkers showed up. Guess who that was? Fred Danback. And Fred Danback's waving this law around, and they're saying, well, we're going to use this law. And the great thing about the Hudson River fishermen, which eventually became the River Keeper, they weren't afraid of taking people to court. They were going to kick butt, take names, and collect the bounty. In those days, you could make money on this deal. If you prosecuted somebody, if they got a fine, you got 10%. So that was an incentive. So they thought it over, and Croton Point that Jim loved so much, there was a pipe coming out from the rail yards at the south end of the point, where Eagle Fest is. And the pipe was so toxic that when Boyle looked back out there, he said the fumes were so bad that he was afraid to light a cigarette. Ooh, terrible. So they decided to take the railroad to court. Fitted this law perfectly. And they won. They won that case. And then they said, that's pretty good, we won the case. Got 10%. It funded the early days of the River Keeper. So then who did they go after next? Anaconda. The motto of the guy, he's going to strangle his competition. He's going to strangle his competition. 22 pipes going into the river. And they used that law, and eventually they won the case. It was the biggest legal settlement at the time in the 60s. It was over $110,000 fine. So Fred Danback, our hero, he got 10%. Wow. He also got fired. And he became the maintenance man at the old Beczak Center. You know, he would be there. And he was just an amazing guy. He was into plants and flowers. And we talk about the daylighting. The daylighting, you know. Fred was like a broken record. Because he kept saying, San Antonio Riverwalk, we got to bring that Sawmill River above ground. We can't let it sit on the ground. So in the early days, our friends Otis Elevator was still in business. Otis Elevator. And they were in the manufacturing business, right? Oil and sludge and stuff. And they would put all their waste into this tank. And on Sunday mornings, the security guard that was working in the plant, nobody worked on Sunday, right? His job was to go down to the basement. And there would be a valve, and he would turn the valve. Then all of a sudden, the mouth of the Sawmill River Creek, where the Science Barges, would turn the color of blue and muck. And of course, the Volunteer Lifesaving Corps was right there, so they noticed it. So Danback organized the team. Robbie Holden would have been leading the charge on this. I can see this. Waders, hard hat, flashlights. So they locate the pipe in the tunnel where this stuff is coming out. So during the week, they go back. They got their cement. They got their wire mesh. They're in the tunnel. Cementing that pipe up. The next Sunday, the security guard He goes down to the tank, turns the valve, and the basement of Otis Elevator had the most ungodly flood of you-know-what in their basement. But they never went down into the pipe to see what was wrong. So it's, you know, Fred was a hero for doing that stuff. So he was an advocate for the day lane. I swear that he was the one that talked to Pataki, Governor Pataki, and it was him that really planted that seed. Rick Magda gives me some of the credit. They came up with the idea of a river keeper, because Bob, he wrote it in his book, river keeper. They had done it in England. They had people patrol the streams in England to keep the poor people from fishing in them, to protect the streams. So, but Bob's idea was a river keeper was to have a patrol boat that could go out and monitor the river. And we still have one today. We have John Lipscomb, who's an amazing guy, and he does the job. He's out there. You know, we'll see him on the river soon. And they work up and down the river. He's down at Newtown Creek. But John Cronin, some of you maybe remember, he was like the second river keeper. Tom Wyatt was the first. They only paid him $25 a week, so he didn't last long. But, you know, John Cronin was out there. He had a beautiful boat. And it was just at this time that the Exxon oil tankers were going up the river. You'd see Exxon oil tankers with the flag going up the river. And they would go up north, and they would stop where the water was fresh and drinkable, and they would pump their ballast water out. Lots of ballast water into the river. And then they would reverse the pumps. And these huge oil tankers, you could watch them. They would be filled up with water. And they would take that water down to Aruba. Exxon had a refinery in Aruba, and there was hotels and stuff like that. And the joke always was, if you were in a hotel and you were swimming in the pool and you felt close to home, you probably were. They put Hudson River water in the swimming pool down there. So it's can you imagine that? Hudson River water in Aruba swimming pools? So Cronin, one of the guys that was a sailor up the river, he saw this whole thing going on, and he said, something's not right. You know, we can't have billed water being pumped into the river. There was towns that took their drinking water right out of that spot. So Cronin had just gotten his new boat, freshly painted. He roars out there and he gets on the radio, and he's talking to Exxon, and asking for the captain of the ship, and the captain is looking at this little boat that's got Riverkeeper on the side. What the hell does that mean, Riverkeeper? So John says, listen, Captain, I'm interested in your operation. What are you doing? And the guy said, I'm the captain of an Exxon vessel. Captain of an Exxon vessel. You know, that's pretty distinguished. And he says, the Cronin on the microphone, he said, and who are you? Who are you? And Cronin answers back, I'm the Riverkeeper. The freaking Exxon guy, you know, didn't have a clue who that was. But anyway, they took Exxon to court. And there was another case that they probably, you know, what was going on there. So Exxon never admitted that they were wrong. All this water they were taking out of the Hudson, filling up the tankers and going down to Aruba, they never admitted that they were wrong. But they set up a fund called the Hudson River Improvement Fund, and that funded a lot of the many projects that we did on on the Hudson over the years. It's interesting also, this goes back to 1962. What happened in 1962, Jim? September 26th, 1962. Rachel Carson comes out with her book, and Silent Spring. And in the New York Times, there's an article. Con Edison. Think we must, Con Edison in those days, right? They have an idea for Storm King Mountain. Storm King Mountain is up by Cold Spring. It's this mammoth, 1,400-foot rock just rising out of the river. And Con Edison had the idea that they would put a reservoir up at the top of a reservoir, hold a few million gallons of water, and then at night, when they had extra electricity, they would pump that Hudson River water up, put it in the reservoir at the top, and then in the day, especially during the summer, when there were a lot of air conditioners going on, guess what they would do? They'd pull the plug, and all that water that was up in the reservoir would turn the turbines and make electricity. It actually cost 3 kilowatts of electricity to make 2 kilowatts, but you know, that didn't seem to matter. But what happened was, in that period, 1963, that's when Scenic Hudson first got together, the Scenic Hudson Preservation Society. And there were a lot of interesting people that started that committee. And some of you guys may know Carl Carmer. Carl Carmer. He lived where, Tim? The Octagon House in Irvington. Holy cow. If you've never seen the Octagon House, it's worth just going up there and seeing it. It's an 8-sided house. Carl was a writer, and he loved the river. The thing that binds everybody together in this story is that there was a love of the Hudson River. So the Hudson River Preservation Society gets together, and they're talking and talking. They said, you know, we can't allow Con Ed to do this. And the case there had to be a permit from the Federal Power Commission. So Con Ed applies to the Power Commission. And the Power Commission, more electricity, that's the best. Con Ed was in trouble in those years, blackouts and stuff. So the Federal Power Commission, they have the hearings. You have to have hearings, right? So it's interesting that they had the hearings down in the city, and they had biologists and engineers testify in front of the committee. And it was interesting. This is where the fishermen kind of joined forces with Scenic Hudson, because Scenic Hudson was talking about saving the natural beauty of this bear of a mountain. And Bob Boyle and the Hudson River fishermen, at the bottom, the spot that striped bass spawned the most was at the bottom of that mountain. And we had this idea that we were going to pump millions of gallons up to the top, and all these spawning fish, all their eggs would be pumped up to the top. Most of them would die. So the biologist that Con Ed got, I don't know where they got him, but he thought the Hudson River was a river, right? River. What do rivers do? They go one way. Our river that we love is the Hudson River estuary. So what does the Hudson River do? Up and down, you know, twice a day. So instead of the number of fish that would be killed on a river that went one way, they had to quadruple the numbers. Quadruple the numbers. So that made an impression. The Federal Power Commission, they still stamped it fine. So it was interesting. I never realized, reading for this talk, it took 17 years to save Storm King Mountain. 17 years. layers of court, layers of court. But in the end, Scenic Hudson, and actually the law that came out of it is the Scenic Hudson law. And to this day, it's on the books. And what it says that a place that has natural beauty, like Storm King Mountain, the citizens, the people of the valley, could have legitimate standing in court to protect that piece of land, that mountain, that desert, just for the scenery. So it's called the Scenic Hudson case. And Scenic Hudson has grown over the years. They helped us with this building, right? They came up with the $900,000 that bought this property. So Scenic Hudson is still alive today, and well, Steve Rosenberg and Ned Sullivan, they're great people. So my voice is starting to give out, so I feel like I better take a sip. I'm gonna talk a little bit about this boat, because in a way, I love this boat. I love the fishermen. I love Scenic Hudson. But the Clearwater, to me, has a very special spot in my heart. And Pete Seeger, who I knew, not well, I was an acquaintance, but in many ways I admired him and his spirit and his saying. So Pete Seeger was actually interesting. Scenic Hudson was a little suspicious of Pete Seeger because the McCarthy hearings were just over at that time, and Pete Seeger was listed as a communist. So we have these fancy pants people up in Garrison, New York, and Cold Spring. They weren't sure if they wanted to associate. Even Carl Palmer was a little suspicious. But Pete, he lent his weight, and he was part of the finest Storm King. Around, I guess it was 1966. How many of you people have seen Pete Seeger when he was alive? Right? A bunch of you guys, right? Tall, thin guy, vegetarian. He had a banjo. The first concert that Pete held to raise money was. And Pete sang. He was on a hay truck. And then at intermission, Pete said, anybody that's interested in this idea of building a Hudson River sloop, come over to the corner of the field. And guess what happened? A bunch of people actually went over. And that's how the Clearwater started. And there was many concerts, and the ideas of building this boat, this classroom on the waves, the environmental boat of the United States. And it took a while to get it organized. And then they built the boat up in Maine at the Harvey Gamage Yard. It took 2 years, and they launched it, and they sailed it down the coast. They sailed it down the coast, this bunch of hippies. Thank God they had one guy, Alan Hannafoo, that knew how to sail. But he made it into New York Harbor, and along the way, they stopped at different towns and they had concerts. And to pay Harvey off, they actually had to take some loans out. Pete, probably using his retirement money again, helped pay the debt to get the boat out of the yard. Does this sound familiar, Bridget? But the boat yards don't let you get your boat out unless your bills are paid. So, Don McLean, you remember Don McLean? He lent money. So, a few other famous folk singers. So, the Clearwater came down, and Christopher Letts, who I was trying to talk to, is a great Hudson River educator. He's the one that designed the education programs on the boat. And for 50 years, the boat has been taking kids out on the river. And when you sail on the boat, you always get to raise the mainsail. Raise the mainsail. That's the thing. You can talk to kids. How many people have sailed on the Clearwater? How many people have raised the mainsail? Yay! It's a good memory. So we love having the Clearwater come in. It comes into the Science Barge and docks. So it's cool. So it's still going strong. They're looking for an executive director. If somebody wants to draw with little pay. But it's a great group. So, this is a picture of the Sojourner Truth, the boat that we had up in Hastings. 1/3 the size of the crew. A great boat, eventually went on the rocks up in Croton. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up with a quote from Bob Boyle. And I may read it twice because it's important. To those who know it, the Hudson River is the most beautiful, messed up, productive, ignored, and surprising piece of water on the face of the earth. There is no other river quite like it, and for some persons, myself included, no other river will do. The Hudson is the river. So I thank you very much for your attention.
This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to New York Island, the Redwood Forest, the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I was walking a ribbon of highway, I saw above me an endless skyway. I saw below me a golden valley. This land was made for you and me. This land is yours.